Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Show Studio's live panel discussions. In these discussions, experts from all parts of the industry discuss and debate the most important Fashion Week shows of the season. Today, for our panel of the season, we're going to be discussing Paco Rabanne's Autumn-Winter 21. My name is Darkwah Kyei-Darkwah. I will be the chair for the conversation today. I am a non-binary artist, writer, and also art director. And I will now hand over to India to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm India. I'm Senior Commissioning Editor at Behavioural Insights Practice, Canvas 8, and I'm a fashion writer and editor as well.
And Joshua?
And I'm Joshua James Small, so I'm a sustainable womenswear designer, freelance writer, and model at First Model Management.
Thank you. Well, I think we're just going to dive right into it. I want to know what you thought of the presentation of the collection, India.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously spoke to the kind of post-pandemic sense of like joy and excitement that I think lots of people are beginning to like, especially, you know, with the weather and it being sunny outside, there's this general sense of energy and sense of return to kind of maybe a freedom that's been lacking. But I also, in terms of just the film and the presentation, really like the subversion of like that's still happening in the bedroom. So there's this kind of like playing with the, you know, both the fantasy of the dress and the kind of escapism, but it's still taking place within like a enclosed space. But you know, it was very rich in textures and kind of, yeah, it was high energy and felt quite playful. So yeah, I enjoyed it.
Joshua, what did you think?
I was mixed opinions. I was really looking forward to this, to be honest, because I haven't been tuning into too many shows, but there are a few that I wanted to watch based on how successful they were previous season. And this was one that I was quite looking forward to because I think the last collection was quite strong. This one, there were looks that I liked and pieces that I thought were quite strong and followed from the success of the previous collection, but there were quite a few misses also. So it was like a very 50-50 with this collection.
It did have a sense of kind of getting ready for a post-pandemic world, that kind of almost making me feel as though I was getting ready in the bedroom with my friends, like before we go out for a night and then come back and kiki. However, I personally felt that it lacked in the, I don't know, maybe the drama or the glamour that I have come to associate with Paco Rabanne. It felt like there were hints of it and it was soft glamour, but to me, it felt like, forgive me for saying this, Alessandro Michele by way of Anthony Vaccarello for Saint Laurent, but like trying to do a softer fabrication between the two. I don't know, am I being harsh? Go on.
I was going to say, I just thought, like, to follow on from your perhaps negative connotation, I would say it looked a bit like an M&S advert. I hate to say that, but I watched it without audio before I listened to the audio afterwards, and it looked like a Christmas M&S commercial from years ago. Like, you can see that money's been put into it, but it hasn't been finessed to the level that you would expect for that brand. Like, it's been finessed at perhaps a high street level that's got a few million for like a big commercial, but it hasn't been finessed for what you would expect for like a larger brand. And when you look at the previous collection, that was really, I thought that was standout. Like, I know many stylists that have wanted those pieces. I know that those pieces from the previous collection have been unavailable to a lot of people, from like large stylists to known celebrities, just because they're so in demand at the moment. And I think this was a bit of a misstep, I think, overall, following from the previous collection. It could have been done in a different way, but that's not to say there weren't nice pieces. Like, I don't want to slander it entirely.
Oh no! I mean, we have to be fair. There were definitely some lovely pieces. Looking at the pieces though, I did feel that there was also a sense of, while dressing to look good, you're also dressing for comfort. And I was in a talk with Melanie Rickey last week, who I think was an editor at Grazia, and she said that she felt that coming out of the pandemic, despite the fact that we are going to want to zhuzh up and look nice, we are going to ultimately be dressing and brands will therefore also be gearing their stuff towards feeling more comfortable, less of the stunt pulling and the looks, and more of the like comfort, quiet, maybe Princess Diana on a country walk kind of vibe. Sorry, she's full of references today. How do you guys feel about that change in fashion? Do you believe that that's actually something that will happen, that we'll see a lot more of?
I kind of feel like it's gonna, yeah, I would actually tend towards the opposite, which is I think that people will be drawn more towards kind of structure and tailoring and like less functional dress, simply because again, it's like the opportunity to unleash a way of dressing that, I mean, obviously you can do it at home, but like it's taking something to the streets that's been quite confined. And it did feel like there was kind of a missed opportunity to like subvert some of the codes of the house in terms of like the chainmail and the kind of more like, yeah, the kind of less like wearable fabrics that potentially the house has played with before. And I think this, yeah, this definitely was like much more gentle and kind of softer, as you say, which I don't know. I mean, I think it's more about like, it spoke more to kind of movement and freedom rather than like a constraint, but yeah, whether that will last, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I agree that I think people will want more will want comfort, but I think there'll also be, there's also two types of people. I think the people that would wear more extravagant pieces will continue to do so and probably have tried to do so at home and will continue to do so even after we're unleashed into the world. I don't think it will be a case that everyone will go for comfort, because I think like myself and a lot of my friends have got pieces that perhaps we haven't worn out because we haven't had an occasion to wear them to. So as soon as we're allowed to, I think we will. But I think, and then again, obviously, as the kind of person that wants comfort and has wanted comfort continuously. So I think there will always be a mix. I don't think it will be like everyone will want comfort automatically. But I think this collection balances it in a weird way. The idea of like high glamour, unwearable pieces, and these like more comfortable, accessible pieces. I think it's balanced in an odd way, because I yet again referenced the previous collection because I think it was so strong. In the previous collection, you've got like some denim pieces, some like bustier, like little bralettes, and some nice like soft jackets over the top, and softer tailoring. I think that looks quite nice, and that's accessible from like a average consumer kind of point of view. But then you also had the really high end, like overt chainmail pieces and beaded pieces, which you see dripping into this new collection. But I think it's mismatched with all these weird 40s prints in this collection, and that makes it look a bit dowdy. Like it looks a bit like there are I pointed out like there are a couple of looks that I think from this collection that were really solid, and that's like towards the start, the first two looks, the opening looks are encrusted, they're black, they're chic, they're quite well made. They're not too over. I think they could be separated and accessed by someone who doesn't like something that's, you know, too over the top. But then you move on and you've got there's a jumper in there, which I had to look twice to think whether it's got like gems and an opening around the bustier. And it just looks very like high street H&M, like Marks and Spencer's when they do like a Christmas range. And I just don't understand. There we go. It's in the middle look there. And I don't understand why they've slipped that into a collection with the like 40s print at the bottom. I just think it's a miss. That look itself is a misstep.
Yeah, I think the mismatchiness of the looks of fabrications or textures and prints even does speak to this kind of, how do I say it without sounding like a camp stander, hobbledy idea whereby, you know, we're mixing loads of textures and playing. It is that kind of flaneur feel that I feel kind of dripping into here, but I'm not sure it was committed to enough. I almost wanted for a re-emergence collection, because ultimately this is what I feel we're seeing with a lot of collections now coming out of lockdown and coming out of these kinds of restrictions. I would have hoped that, you know, a nod to the unwearable dresses of, you know, the first ever, I think it was the first ever eponymous collection for Paco Rabanne. I would have liked a nod to that kind of interesting use of fabric and texture and just really making it art again, because it felt too real. And I feel like we should be breaking away from reality a little bit. It's been bleak for a while, is what I'm saying. So
also we've got to remember how Paco Rabanne runs. Like they make most of the money off perfume and items that aren't necessarily clothing. So they have the room and accessibility to be able to make pieces that aren't wearable, that aren't necessarily going to sell. Especially at the moment, a lot of brands are making pieces that aren't necessarily going to sell because they know people aren't going to buy them. There's less people buying clothing at the moment, so there's room to be able to create pieces that are art pieces that are never going to be reworn or reproduced, because they don't have to necessarily consider that that is where their main income is coming from. A lot of brands have shifted how their income is made, so they're focusing on areas that like perfume and makeup that they can make that money off of, and that's where Paco Rabanne, I think, makes most of their money, from perfume. So they have the room to be able to do extravagant things. I don't understand why at this moment in time they're focusing on very, very heavily wearable pieces.
Yeah, this is,
yeah, it kind of speaks to just like I don't know, I mean, there is just a general uncertainty, I guess, around like it feels kind of confused in general. It's like not really sure where it's going, if it's going out, if it's staying in, and maybe that just speaks to where the kind of industry is in general, is that there's this sense of uncertainty of like what that new normal is going to look like as well, and how we can what role people actually want fashion to play in it.
I'd like to look at the collection just a little bit more closely. Were there any standout? I know that Joshua, you mentioned that there was a sweater that you looked at. Can we go back to that? Can you just tell us a little bit about why that also spoke to you? Because you said you did a double take.
I don't like it necessarily, but I think it's just clunky. I think there are some nice pieces in this collection, but this, if we're going to dissect, I've got negative and positive. This is one of my negative looks, and I just think the heaviness of that knit with the kind of encrusted element around the opening just feels, I don't know, it just feels a bit clunky. With the 40s print, there's just a lot going on that feels a bit dowdy. Like, it doesn't feel like a girl dress. I feel like if I was getting dressed up in my room, like, that's not a look that I would want to find. It doesn't even, in the even the makeup itself, the makeup is quite nice, done by Pantograph as far as I'm aware, but I think it could have been a bit more overt. I think with this sort of thing, you can go, I think you should, especially when it's a lookbook style show, you should be overt, because then it should be like that Devil Wears Prada trickle down effect. Like, you shouldn't look at these images and think, oh, like, that's me. Like, you should be able to think, I can do that. Like, I would like to do that. And then you emulate something that's a bit bigger than you, a bit larger than life. Do you know what I mean? Because you want these images to live on. And like, I just feel like a chunky knit that's a bit bejeweled is something that you wouldn't really, it's perhaps something you'd wear if you didn't want to be photographed on Christmas Day, but it's not necessarily something that you would wear to go to a night out. But then there are some nicer looks in there, some good looks. So I put down 16 and 20. They're a bit muddled on Vogue Runway, I think. So like later I go down, they're like a few bejeweled, I think. Yeah, there's one there which I can't really point it out. The numbers on Vogue Runway are a bit odd. Yeah, so looks like this, I just think they should have carried through they should be much heavier and much more overt with this sort of textile, because I think it was really successful from the last collection. It got a lot of interest from the previous collection, and it also arcs back, because obviously the idea with this collection is that it looks like 70s 80s style bedroom girl getting ready, and like 60s and 70s is when Paco Rabanne was at their real peak. You know, they've got all this space age, like metallic kind of chainmail style textile. So if you're going to hark back to that era for your visuals, why not use that in a really overt way for your collection, especially when it's so successful from the previous collection, because these are the pieces that are borrowed the most. But also some nicer elements. Bags, I think bags were really well done. There were some nice encrusted bags. So I guess that you could probably pick this whole collection apart and piece together half of the looks into a really strong set body of work, and then you've got these sort of looks that should have been perhaps reassessed, I think.
Yeah, I think it's always a shame when we end up talking about the makeup and the bags a little bit more than the clothing, but that's what happens. India, were there any standout pieces for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was not really, it felt almost like it was blurring into one kind of whole, and I think yeah, I didn't feel like it was that it was leaning into like very distinctive looks. I mean, obviously the silver dress was like a moment of kind of it's like the full long sleeved, like playing with the sort of prairie, I don't know, disco vibes, mishmash, which I don't know, it didn't, I mean, it stands out because it's kind of singular, I guess, in its vision, where a lot of them, as we've been talking about, have been a bit more like put together. but no, it was a general vibe. I mean, I think it felt like it was leaning a lot more on the interplay of textures and materials, and using that to conjure a kind of general overall sense.
It came together as a collection ultimately that I thought was styled nicely, which is neither here nor there, in my opinion. Before we came on, you mentioned Guy Bourdin, and I do see. Sorry, Joshua, you mentioned Guy Bourdin. I do see a likeness to the Bourdin girls. Can you speak to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about this specifically because there aren't too many reviews of the collection. There was not too much conversation about the collection, which I thought was a bit odd because I thought that a lot of people were quite excited, well, myself included, to see what they would do this season. And there are a few references, nods to those images by Guy Bourdin, and like it just, I don't know. I think that this collection, it has the same feel in the way it's photographed, but I think what they should have geared more to that angle. Actually, they should have made it. I'm not saying that they need to look sexier, but like could have been a bit more playful with the way that they work the images, they work the photography, they work the way it's shot. It felt, like I said, I opened by saying it looked a bit like an M&S advert, because it does. It's just joyful girls bouncing up and down. And like I think if you'd have had it styled in a slightly more cheeky way, it would have balanced out the 40s prints that are a bit dull, a bit more lackluster, and it would have made it seem a bit more exciting. Because the prints of the fabrics themselves aren't that exciting, if I'm going to be honest, but that doesn't mean that the look itself can't be exciting. And I think if you'd have photographed it, if it had been shot in a way similar to these photos that we're showing, then I think you could have injected that excitement in another way. So you could have had something that was a really accessible, even that jumper that I picked apart and said it isn't that nice. Like if you'd have had that without the perhaps like dull background, and in a more kind of striking, cheeky photo, like the girl playing and interacting more with the photographer, I think you could have sold that as a much more exciting image and a much more exciting look. But at the moment, I think it's like they almost went there, but then we're like, actually, guys, let's not take it too far. Do you know what I mean? Or like, and it feels a bit restricted.
Well, that speaks very well to, quite directly actually, to what India said earlier about this kind of sense of wanting to step out but not really wanting to step out. This kind of with regards to what to put out and who's going to buy it, because it's almost like you're kind of firing in the dark because we've all been away for so long. Yes, you have your loyal customer, but you're also trying to make sure that you're pushing the envelope a little bit. And I think in pushing the envelope, I'm not necessarily sure that they hit the mark. But that's not for me to tell everyone what to think. India, with regards to that sense of trepidation that we just mentioned, what I don't like to forecast, but I do like to hear people's opinions when they forecast. So what do you think is a likely next step, not only for Paco Rabanne, but yes, starting with Paco Rabanne, and then with regards to how designers and creative directors move forward with communicating with their audiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think for Paco Rabanne and for the industry in the whole, the kind of creating these like community around the brands is going to be so important, like in this kind of next stage, when actually we've seen like so many brands basically have had to be like very purpose driven in terms of like quite immediate responses in the last year. And now when we're emerging into like, you know, they're not instantly having to create hand sanitizer or something, or provide PPE, or like these, how do they go back to kind of occupying or having a relationship with their audience in a kind of more day-to-day, everyday life, and like actually building those relationships across multiple touch points, and you know, essentially bring it out of the bedroom and kind of back into everyday kind of experience. And to be honest, it's a huge challenge. I think that lots of brands are building loyalty around like specific pieces. You know, that's why Telfar is being so successful, because they're building it around like a much smaller collection of products. But I think for luxury brands, like, you know, these kind of more heritage brands, it's a really big challenge to kind of think about what are they actually building these new ecosystems around? Like, what do they really stand for?
Joshua?
Yeah, I was quite interested in how you talk about it as an ecosystem, an environment that they're building, and they're trying to I think that like I've said consistently, I think that they almost were there, but not quite. I think there's ways that they could have geared this collection and moved in a way that is relevant to a consumer that is looking at everything through a laptop. And I'm going to use pop references in the sense of like Kylie and Dua Lipa and how they've been able to garner really successful kind of campaigns around their work through this digital sphere. So if you think of Dua Lipa and her Studio 2054, I think it was, and it was like a sold out, people paid to watch it, and it was quite good show online purely through the digital realm. And I think that her visuals and this collection could have married really well. So they could have harnessed someone, because there's a resurgence in pop culture for like this 70s kind of like disco vibe. Yeah. And I think that matches so well with what they were trying to do with this collection, especially with this girl in the bedroom kind of like trying to play around at home. And I think they could have, and like looking at the reason I reference Kylie is because her new album is obviously like disco infused, and she did yet again another whole like concert online, and everyone watched it through their laptop in their bedroom. And I think that doesn't mean they have to access these stars, but they could have accessed that same vibe, the idea of a girl not just playing around in her room as if she's like a girl from the 80s, play around with the idea of a girl that's in today's world, because people are at home, they're doing the same things, it's just in a different way. These women are still at home getting dressed up, but they're watching a live stream. Do you know what I mean? Cater to that. And I think, and that's what I mean by, I think they were almost there, but not quite. Like these looks they have nods to like Guy Bourdin and like the 70s, and like this idea of glamour and this girl that's getting dressed up for a night out and she's staying at home and having fun at pre-drinks, but like make that accessible to or understandable to a consumer in today's world, because like especially over the last year no one's been going out, so we can't relate to that in a very direct sense because no one's getting ready to go out, but we can relate to getting ready for like a Zoom like a Zoom party. Do you know what I mean? Which might sound a bit naff, but like make it work. Do you know what I mean? Push that concept to the furthest you can, to the most relevant point of consumers' minds today. And then if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, you tried.
Yeah, I totally agreed. I want to jump back to India's saying that people, creative directors and brands in general will try to be creating a community around the brand. And this has just come to me, so forgive me if I word it a little bit weirdly, but as a person of color looking at the casting, it was good. They covered their bases there. I felt that after that, though, I don't expect every single collection from now on to, take a nod to social justice. I think, though, if we're talking about something that looks or feels a little bit more real, then that sense of reality should somehow have permeated into it. Listen, you've got a girl with an afro jumping on it, but like you can style her in such a way that gives a nod to it. I appreciate the 3.5 seconds that they gave to her bouncing afro. Thank you for featuring the hair texture. But at the same time, it feels detached, but not detached enough to be fantasy, but not close enough to be reality. Like you said, they hit the mark, but not quite. And if I'm perfectly honest, I also haven't been paying attention to too many shows. So when I do look at shows, I do kind of want to feel something, and I just was left wanting a feeling as opposed to having gotten one at all. Of course, there were standout pieces. Absolutely, there were some pieces that I would die to wear, but I overall was not too sure about it. Gosh, I've just lost myself. Apologies. With regards to the previous collection, can we just pull up the collection from the past season, please? I feel like it's such a jump. And I'm not, I understand that, especially with Paco Rabanne, we have come to kind of expect that there's always going to be some new move. You know, there's always going to be something that like takes us in a different direction. But this feels so far away. I wonder what was actually what the idea behind the collection was, because it doesn't get me. It doesn't take me anywhere. With the last collection, can we let's just talk about that a little bit and talk about the things that we liked about it, and also what we felt when we looked at it. Joshua, you seem to be very into it, so I'm going to let you lead.
I love this, and I did say, because like we've just said, I haven't really watched too many shows. Last September, I tried to watch quite a few because I tried to remain engaged in what I had done and known for like the past few years. But this season, especially, I haven't really watched that many. There are only a few that I've looked at and been like, oh, stand up. But this was one. Paco Rabanne was one I wanted to watch because this show here that we're watching now is really quite good. I think it's quite nice. I don't. Obviously, we were in a period of flux where we had people in a real space and they were all just separated. But I think you could take the people away and the collection would still work just as well in that empty space, having those girls walking around, because the set is minimal, but not too much. Like it still tells the story in the way that they want to, and it links to the clothing, and it's all very well done. It's nice and tight. Specifically, I wanted, like, one of my favorite looks is look 20 from this collection. I just think it is one of the most gorgeous looks I've seen in quite a while. It's really well crafted, and it harks back to their skill sets in chainmail and this kind of like the way of manufacturing clothing that a lot of brands don't do. Do you know what I mean? This is one of their signature ways, there's signature silhouettes and textiles. And I think it's done in such a way that looks very relevant. Like it has nods to the like prints of Richard Quinn. But obviously it's a real life textile that's linked to how they would produce their chainmail previously. So it's relevant, but also pulls from their archive. I just think it's beautiful. And it's one of the most loaned pieces from their previous collection. Like it's constantly out. So it's like, that's why, and that's this in itself, this is one look that why I was excited to see this new collection. And that's why I agree with you that I think is a big jump from this previous body of work to this new body of work, because I think the previous body of work, when you have a strong collection or a strong idea, you can run with that for 2-3 seasons. That doesn't mean you have to repeat the same things, but you can explore what was successful. And I think that textile and that look was extremely successful. That could have informed 4 more looks for this new collection in different colorways, using different crystals, different placements, and a slightly different silhouette. And I think people would have been just as enthused, just as excited as they were with that previous collection, seeing it in different ways in this new collection. So I just don't understand the jump.
India?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because this is almost like the reverse of, and this last collection is the reverse of this one, in terms of like you have kind of much more like loungewear, you know, with the lace, and kind of like speaking much more directly to kind of underwear and pajamas, and it's much silkier and smoother, but within the setting of like a deconstructed sort of dystopian disco. Like it's kind of the complete flip, and I'm not sure how intentional they are maybe to sit together as a kind of like a wider vision for the house, because it does kind of it feels like the exact opposite. It's like 2 forms of experience where actually, yeah, this is weirdly more about dressing as though you're staying in, but you're outside. You know, you have those views there of like the street literally like right there, whereas autumn winter 21, it feels much more like you're dressing up but you've got nowhere to go. So I kind of prefer, I like the slinkiness and the kind of silkiness of the previous collection, and it does feel a bit more united in terms of even though there's lots of different textures going on, there's kind of like, it feels a bit more singular in its vision. But yeah, I don't know, I think weirdly they do kind of sit together, they do speak to each other as a kind of continuation of the aesthetic identity, even though they do feel quite distinct.
I half agree with you, but I also because now let's talk about gender in fashion and gender performance or gender presentation in fashion. Mm-hmm. Let's go there for a second. I felt like with the last collection, even though it does have so much of a feel of femininity and this kind of sleek, slinky, sexy, I also felt that there was a rebellion against the typical ideas of femininity in the way that materials were put together, in the way that it was styled, in the way that the models were coming down the runway, and in the way that the hair was done. Now, when we look at this collection, it almost feels like all of those ideas have been put in a box and shelved. And I'm in a time where we're talking about gender and gender identity so much more. Do you feel this was a smart move by the creative director to go down a route that is so very obviously and blatantly old style femininity?
I mean, yeah, I'm not sure how political a stance this collection was like intended to have. I was like, I'm not sure how conscious or whether that even really factored that much into the thinking in terms of, yeah, I don't know. I mean, from a kind of positioning, I guess I was going to say it's potentially subverting it, but if it is, it isn't really obvious enough, I guess. So yeah, you're right. I suppose it is risky because it is playing into kind of old school tropes in that way.
Joshua?
Yeah, I think it was, I don't want to be, didn't want to be overtly negative, but I think it's a misstep by like you said, putting everything from this previous collection in a box and moving to a visual that identifies with a woman that isn't really relevant to today or how people present themselves today. I think this previous collection works quite well, and I think you could, like, you literally, as you were talking about that, I was watching the video of the collection and thinking you could literally take this whole collection and play around with it with a more, like, a whole spectrum of gender identities, and it would look like a different collection because you'd have pushed it to that extreme. And it would have been more, there are just, I think the pieces, it's all got to be dissected separately. I think the clothing is nice as it is, but I think that you could have, the brand is almost but not quite there. I think they could harness so many different elements of how people identify and represent themselves and portray themselves and express themselves in their own way, because this new collection was expressing a woman at home. And I don't think it's atypical of a large variation of women or identities. I think that you could, it would have been nice. I don't know. I just think that the previous collection was done quite well and could have been exacerbated and extended and exaggerated with a more modern take. Like I said previously, it would have been nice to see a variety. It would have been nice to see similar silhouettes to the previous, but with a further exploration into how you dress these women and how people are dressing at home. And it would have been nice, you could have, like, that chainmail would have looked really nice on a variety of different people. It would have been more contemporary, more accessible, to think about how people dress at home that aren't necessarily this atypical woman. You know, there are lots of different gender identities that enjoy these clothes and enjoy this brand, and it would have been nice to see that in this campaign. I think this, like, I still think that the way that this collection, this recent collection, was presented is a bit it's a bit old-fashioned. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't really only represents a very small amount of people. The casting is great in it.
Yeah.
But the casting isn't the issue necessarily. It's the identity of the woman. Like, you could have a great casting, but if you're portraying that woman as someone from 4 decades ago, that isn't in tune with how we are today. Like, that's not how women present themselves. Yes, they've got a diverse casting, and it's great that you can see her natural hair of the model of color with, like, her natural hair bouncing in the video. That's wonderful to see, because lots of brands don't. They tame it back, and it's nice to see that. But it would be nice to see that in a contemporary lens, through a contemporary lens with a contemporary woman.
Yes.
Yeah, I do feel like when you're using nostalgia, one of the kind of creative opportunities is to, like, play with it and recontextualize it rather than kind of doing a direct copy. And I think especially, like, young consumers, we're seeing, you know, this idea of, like, faux nostalgia. So it's even being nostalgic, like, for times that you were never present in before. So there is an opportunity really to reimagine it. You can take those kind of, like, iconic images and really reimagine them for the consumer now, who's, like, maybe has some kind of emotional, imaginative connection to them, never experienced them firsthand, but wants to do something new with them. It's like, it's the same thing as kind of, you know, the meme culture and like internet pastiches that we're seeing. Like there's just a creative thing of taking what's there and redoing it in a new way rather than just directly replicating, which, yeah, as you guys have said, it's kind of that, it's like that.
Yeah, it just feels it feels a little too out of touch for me on many counts. I think it's been said in the news a few times, you know, talking about like we're ushering in a new era of the roaring 20s, whereby we're going to be, you know, out there living large and in charge once Miss Rona's left the building. And everything I see in this collection just doesn't take me there. It gives a little, it gives you comfort, it gives you some kind of like chic but casual elegance, but it ultimately just doesn't feel like anyone that's currently alive, or if they are, it's just anyone that's going to be actively consuming. And I think it's rather disappointing.
Yeah. Also, we've got to remember that everyone seems to think that obviously we've had like a long period in different lockdowns and society has changed a lot over the last year, but everything hasn't stayed the same. Culture has changed a lot over the last year, and we seem to be forgetting that especially younger generations that are much easier to adapt to change, that the way they access things, it doesn't faze them necessarily that we're in lockdown. They're just finding new ways to do it through streaming sites, through streaming concerts, through like TikTok, all of these things that perhaps a lot of brands still think are gimmicks. Like that's a really relevant way of engaging with a consumer. And I think, and that is the consumer now, that's what people do. And I don't think it's very wise to portray a woman as someone of the past, as almost like a caricature of someone that has been, when there are new identities and new ways that people are expressing themselves in today's culture, especially since lockdown 1, that they could harness. It's like new subcultures, new ways that we're living.
Yeah.
I wonder if the styling does potentially invite that. It is a kind of more like personal approach to putting looks together. So is it about inviting, you know, the Paco Rabanne women to kind of interpret clothes how they want? And there's not a huge amount of cues, as we've kind of spoken about, but is that mismatching and the fact that I'm just thinking about, you know, the kind of range of bows and ribbons and way of tying and layering things, is that also an invitation to kind of like, you know, trends have been decentralized, so actually just wear it how you want it? And
no, I do think that's definitely an element. I, however, feel that in presenting that to us, then there could have been more of a feeling of that. We were looking at complete looks bouncing around. Like ultimately, we're in a Paco Rabanne 16-year-old girl, like imagining she's 28's dream, like getting ready. And we weren't taken to Fantasyland at all. Joshua, you were going to say something just before.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's kind of like, is Paris elegance through British eclecticism. Like that's what it essentially is. But I don't think that works necessarily. I tried to find out who styled it, but I couldn't. I don't know why. I couldn't find. I'm sure there is someone. It's accessible somewhere. I just probably couldn't find it because it's directly after the show. But I just think it's a bit clumsy. I do understand that obviously the idea that perhaps women are seeing this in, it's that eclectic idea of just mismatching and how you would access the brand yourself, but you don't necessarily want to see that in the first images you see of the collection. I'm a firm believer that you want that collection, or that first time you see the collection, to be the designer's vision full on, and it needs to be extreme. It needs to be the most extreme version that those clothes can be, because it will trickle down. Because we as consumers understand that when we see those photos, we've understood for decades that when you see a photo in like Vogue, you're not necessarily going to buy that whole look. You're not necessarily going to replicate that whole look, but you might look at a jumper or a pair of trousers or a well-cut skirt and say, I'll take that and I can match that with a jacket I already have.
Yeah.
You know, that is how someone, so you don't want to see that when you first see the collection, because that's, in my mind, I think that's just a bit lazy. You want to see like looks that have really been considered? Do you really consider that that is the best version of that look? And then it's up to someone else to interpret that. Do you know what I mean? And I think that, I don't know, maybe they did want it to look eclectic and look like a woman that has just kind of like mismatched pieces, and they wanted that eclecticism, but I just don't think that's right, really, necessarily, when you're trying to form an identity, a brand identity. And I think that shows from when we compared the previous collection to this collection. Previous collection, I think, in my mind, it seems much more labored over. They've considered what goes with what, how it works, how it flows as a collection, and it works much better, because, and when you look at that, you don't necessarily think you're going to wear those pieces, because some of them are out of reach, but it is the idea of things being out of reach that makes you want them more. Like, if everything seems accessible to you, what is, and you could get that jumper in M&S or in a charity shop, what is going to make you buy into that brand? You want to be able to think like, oh, I want to save up for this piece, or I want to be able to make that piece myself, you know, kind of, you want people to engage with the idea of the brand rather than it be accessible from day dot.
Yes, exactly that. I think that's a good way to round up. In the word, well, if I was to do a RuPaul quote, I would probably say, Paco Rabanne, your previous collection left us high and mighty, but this one was just out of reach. I just want to say thank you all. Thank you, India, and thank you, Joshua. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you all for watching. For more extensive Fashion Week coverage, be sure to visit showstudio.com. And if you're watching via Show Studio's YouTube, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe below, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much.